Hello and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brook Olson. And this week, my special guest is Luke Dalflume. Luke is a doctor of psychology, PhD, and works in Peoria, Illinois, and does a lot of evaluations. Tell me a little bit more about your practice, Luke, if you would.
Sure. So I am part of a group private practice. We have several psychologists, we have a social worker, and we have some LCPCs, and we see everything. So we're working with families who are divorcing or have already divorced. We work with children as young as 2. We've had people as old as 99. We do psychotherapy. We're a Christian practice, and what that means is everybody in our practice identifies as a Christian. We don't do euthetic counseling or biblical counseling, so we're all Christians, but we're doing psychotherapy in a way that is according to the APA ethics and all the other ethics. But about half of our clients identify as Christians, and we when they want to explore their emotional issues and in relationship to their faith, we're all very comfortable doing that, but we don't turn anybody away. And so I consider myself a generalist, but part of what I do is I do court work. And sometimes attorneys, when I'm in court, will challenge me, and they don't say this, but they're essentially saying, well, you're a generalist, you're not a specialist in court work, so what you're saying isn't valid. And I'll tell them, well, I think it's more valid because I am not having to rely upon you to refer people to me. So I can say what I think is true, and I don't have to say what I think you want me to say. I'm not an opinion for hire. I can say whatever I think is true. So I do court work, and one of the offices I work in is in Bloomington, Illinois. We're actually right across the street from the courthouse now, but I also do a lot of other things too.
Okay. So you came together with me through a friend of mine that I've done work with before, Karen Anderson, who does work there in Bloomington, working with parenting coordinating and whatnot. And the reason that I really wanted to reach out to you is we haven't really looked through the lens of somebody that does evaluation work. And by that, I mean custody evaluation, psychological evaluations. And I really wanted to bring that perspective to the listeners of this podcast, because I think it's really an important piece, because so many of them, when they get deep in high conflict and there's such a rift between the parents, often an evaluator is looked to. And I think how you come to your conclusions, how you do your testing, what your process is, how you collect your data becomes really important for people that are going through this to begin to understand that there actually is a process and something that's going on with the evaluator, and at the end of that day, how they come to their conclusions. I think, through most of these, what I found for at least many evaluators is they're trying to walk a fine line and not step over. And I think that is oftentimes a disservice to the people that are coming to get the evaluation, so they can have somebody have the data and an opinion, a professional opinion about what this should probably look like at the end of the day. So I want to step into that conversation with you right now and just really kind of ask you, first of all, how do you collect your data? What are the process for you collecting data for a psych eval or for a child custody evaluation?
Sure. So and in Illinois now, they call it a parenting time evaluation. I don't know what they call it in other places, but I don't know why I'm not sure why the language was changed, but and I want to say I am not going to do those on a regular basis anymore. So I do evaluations, and I'm currently still doing evaluations in high conflict cases. I felt like the custody evaluation was so costly and took so long, and a year and a half later, it's appearing in court, and it seemed like it was very stale. Mm-hmm. And so Karen and guardian ad litem, Nargis Kokar, and I have just begun coordinating with each other a little bit. And the guardian ad litem, attorney Kokar, wants to make it more immediate. So we're going to be gathering data more immediately and entering into the process more immediately, even before the divorce is finalized, to try to make it more useful. And one of her thoughts is that if you wait 18 months for the divorce to be finalized, a lot of positions are hardened, relationships are really damaged. And so if we can do it much more quickly, that'll be more helpful. So I'm going to preface everything I say in light of that. So I'll talk about the big picture parenting time evaluation, but then we can talk maybe about some of the smaller pieces. So with the big picture, with a parenting time evaluation, both parents contact my office. They're told there are going to be a number of appointments where we meet in person. And they're also told that if there's anything they want me to review, they can send it to me. So those are often obviously legal documents. They could be mental health records. I actually had one case where the wife had a boyfriend and had a phone call with him, and it was recorded. I don't think she knew it was, and she was talking about trying to sneak money into him to the jail without it being traced back to her. And she was trying to present as this very righteous person, and yet on this phone call, she sounded very rough and crass and harsh, and it was clearly not the kind of things, picture she would want to present. But that was something I reviewed. And so any data that they want me to review, video, anything like that, it's all, data that might tell me something. And obviously the context of anything is important too, but all of that is important. And so there are these documents, and then I meet with the parents. That's the start. So I'll meet with one parent, and then I'll meet with the other one, and they're kind of setting the table. What is the history? What's been going on? And the other thing we do is anybody who has a caregiving role with the child. So if one of the parents is living with their parents, I'm going to be including the grandparents in the evaluation. Or if there's a teenage stepbrother, I'm going to include them in it as well, because anybody who could have contact with the child, if somebody, for example, was a pedophile, that's important for me to know as I'm gathering this data. So we do that, and I have meetings with each caregiver, each potential caregiver, and the children as well. And I want to see how they interact with each other. Are they free and easy? Are they, there are times where they won't even talk to the caregiver. That kind of thing is really important. So as a psychologist, we're also trained in doing formal assessment. And so in my practice, we would use some personality measures. The big ones are the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. It's in a 3rd edition now. And we also use the Milan Clinical Multi-Axial Inventory 4th edition. And that one is, so the MMPI is really good for what we used to call axis 1 disorders, anxiety, depression, psychosis. The MCMI will pick up on those things, but it's even better at personality disorders. And in a parenting time situation, that's something that's really important. Are you dealing with somebody with an antisocial personality disorder or somebody who's narcissistic. And of course, theoretically, all of the personality disorders will be on a narcissistic spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
Are they histrionic? What are the issues? And so those are important to weigh as well. We have some measures of parent-child relationship. We use one called the Parenting Stress Index, and it evaluates two things. One is how much stress the parent is under in their own life, but then also how stressful they experience the child to be. So are they experiencing their child as being ADHD-like, or do they experience them as not having a lot of qualities they really admire? Some kids are just really difficult. And again, it's the parent's perspective. So we want to know that. There's another one called the Parent-Child Relationship Inventory, and that's a good measure as well. And it evaluates for similar kinds of things.
So I want to slow down there for just a quick second, because I want to run back a little bit
Sure.
to the two inventories that you were talking about originally, and those being things that look at more Axis 1 type disorders, the anxiety, the mood disorders, those types of things. Yes. And then the one that looks a little bit more at the Axis 2 personality disorder stuff, and how, when you start to pull that information out and you start to look at your ancillary contacts, the contacts with teachers, therapists, parents, grandparents, caregivers, all of this, and you start to bring these different data points together, how do you determine, because this is one of the things that really, I think, one is one of the hardest things that you guys do, because you're sitting in a place of, I am going to make some decisions for this family that are going to be dramatic and perhaps life-changing for everybody in the process. And I know that you're looking at it through the lens of best interest of the child process. And there's going to be somebody, if this is done in a complete manner, that's probably going to walk away from this assessment really upset.
Yes.
Because you're delivering data for somebody to make a big decision in terms of where these child are going to be. Sometimes it's a move away, sometimes it's a dramatic change in contact. And the interesting piece that I see around the personality disorder conversation is, these are attachment disorders. And they're really getting pinged at that point when they're getting called out into that. Mm-hmm. So how do you personally process that piece, first of all, as I think is the question that I'm looking for?
Sure. Well, it's hard, right? Because, I mean, think about yourself, and I'm thinking about myself, and I bring certain things to the table. As a parent, my children are 20 and 22, but as a parent, as a spouse, as a human being, and there's strengths and weaknesses. And so, there are things that are important, and certainly a personality disorder. And when you call it an attachment disorder, it's something typically that was cultivated in the parent's own childhood.
Right.
And it's probably being cultivated within the lives of their own children too, right? Because not only did they have difficulty with attachment growing up, but they're exhibiting that probably in their parenting. But that's where all those pieces come into play. And there are some people, I mean, we all, we have our strengths and weaknesses, and we have to figure out, I think at our best, we figure out how do we maximize our strengths and how do we minimize our weaknesses. And there are some people who are really working hard at being the best human beings they can be. And those kind of people are going to be the best parents too. And they may look histrionic. it's not involved with custody at all right now, but I'm working with some kids right now where I'm evaluating them for learning issues, and their mom might have a histrionic personality disorder just from getting history from her about the kids. But the kids are really quirky, interesting in a good way. And something good is going on in this family. And I'm going to assess for a lot of different things. But, it seems like whatever's going on, the parents in their divorce have figured something out where these kids are, they're doing pretty well. So I'm giving you a long answer to say there are a lot of different things that you process, but the same piece. So let's say histrionic personality disorder or narcissistic, it's going to look different with every person based on the rest of who they are. And an important part of it is, so this is like detective work in a lot of ways. And an important part of it is, how does it play out in their lives? So how does it play out? So I'm seeing the parent, and then I'm seeing how they talk about their soon-to-be ex-spouse or their ex-spouse. I'm seeing how they interact with their child, how their child interacts with them, how their child talks about them, how they give me ancillary context. I let them do 3. If they want to do 5, I'll say, well, that's fine, but you're each going to do 5. It's always balanced. And I talk to these people, and how do these people experience them? And do they really seem to know them? Or are they giving a really shallow, oh, they're a great guy or a great woman, a really shallow. So how does it play out? And some people really have done hard work, and that's rewarding. Unfortunately, with the most high conflict cases, often that's not the case. I mean, they're at war and they're throwing the knives, but so it is detective work, and there's not any one piece. And that's where I really try, usually somebody's ordered to pay me, one of the parents, and then at the settlement, they'll divvy it up. But I really try hard not to let that be the deciding factor. I want to be focusing on what is the data in front of me. And one of the things, one of the statistical terms would be convergent validity. And what that means is you have a data point here, and you have a data point here, and you have a data point here. And ideally, they're all saying similar things. So if you have somebody who's narcissistic, for example, you might see them come in and they spend most of the session talking about themselves and not their child. And so that's confirming what the MCMI says. And you might see that they have a trail of broken relationships, and they don't really have any long-standing relationship in their life, or they have a transactional relationship with everybody in their life. What can I get out of them? And they, as they talk, they're talking that way. And that's great. And it really doesn't, we could use an automated machine to do an evaluation of that case. Most people are more complex than that, though, where all the data doesn't neatly fit. And that's where we come in. I want to return to something Brooke, you were saying a moment ago, or a few minutes ago, about how you feel like a lot of evaluators don't really give the full picture. And I'm guessing part of what you're saying is a lot of times we don't give explicit recommendations. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so, yeah.
And I guess, I don't know if I would say guilty. I have done the same thing at points. I do an evaluation, and near the end of it, I do summarize everything, the strengths, and then part of it is strengths and weaknesses of each parent. I know it's not my decision, ultimately, it's the judge's. And if I'm called into court and asked, I will be more explicit. But there are times where I leave it at that. And to my mind, I'm hoping, as I funnel it down, that it's pretty clear what the issues are and who's strong in what and who's weak in what. But
yeah, I think part of where things get a little bit mixed in the arena is judges are attorneys, and many of them try to go out and get extra information about this kind of stuff. Some don't, some are brand new, and they're faced with trying to get this information so they can make decisions. And when some of that information coming of that is more implicit than explicit, it makes it hard for them to grab a hold of this and make a decision of where this wants to go.
Yes.
And, you know, my practice is around coaching and dealing with all high conflict people. I mean, this is my world. Why I chose that, who knows? But yeah, actually, I do know. But,
is that a story you've told in another podcast?
Right. No, I actually have. I've revealed that one more than once. But, you know, in looking at this, I see, and I try not to get dualistic. I try not to go polarized in it. I try to stay really in the realm of all of these people are actually doing the best that they can. Mm-hmm. And not everybody has the same set of tools. They can't all be in this range of being exemplary parents and on and on and on. But I find frequently that there is one parent that is more competent than the other. Not always, but more often than not. And this also speaks to how personality disorders attract their partners. So, you know, as you start to do your assessments, some of this stuff has got to start to glare at you. And when we look at, you know, narcissistic parenting styles and borderline parenting styles are not ideal parenting styles by any stretch of the imagination. Yet nobody is going to yank a child away from them because they need that contact, they need that parent, they need that peace. So as an evaluator, how do you begin to sift through this data and begin to come up with something that is solid, that you can stand on, that you can say, I think given these data points, this is the best, in the best interest for these children under these circumstances? Because, yeah, I'm just going to leave it there for the moment.
Well, and you know, of course, you look for the obvious things first. So, is there a parent who has a substance abuse history? We use a couple of measures that measure for abuse potential. You know, is there a history of one parent being abusive? And obviously, that's a huge thing, and it depends on the age of the child. But really, at any age, you know, that's a big red flag. So the, you know, prospect of physical abuse, prospect of emotional abuse, histories of restraining orders or legal involvement, and depending on what the legal involvement is all about, those are big red flags, and those weigh pretty heavily. It's amazing to me a lot of times when I've done these, and how often the parents' personality issues, they look similar very often. Mm-hmm. I evaluated somebody else's work once, and both parents were high on histrionic. Mm-hmm. They had in their MCMI profiles looked almost identical. And the evaluator had focused on the mother in this case, saying that she was a German princess. And yet the son's therapist had talked about the son revealing that his father had touched him sexually a couple of times. And to my mind, that should have weighed more heavily. Right. But the German princess thing, this evaluator weighted more heavily. And I didn't understand why. And that didn't make sense to me. So for me, if I'm doing an evaluation, you know, a lot of people say they're like 1/16 Native American. I heard on NPR this morning that, is it in the census data, more and more people are saying they're part Native American, and Native Americans are upset because they're not sure how many people really are Native American. And my wife and I laugh about that. Everybody's 1/16 Native American. Mm-hmm. And so for her to say she's, you know, I wondered when I read that, and I never met with her. I was just asked by an attorney to evaluate this report. And by the way, the report was 13 pages long, which was about 1/10 of what my reports normally are. It felt very skimpy, but I didn't know if it was one of those things, like I'm 1/16 Native American, I'm a German prince, I don't know. But it seemed like the sexual contact was something that should have been explored a lot more and was much more salient to the child's well-being. So you look at abuse things, you look at substance use things, you look at the personality things, and part of it is you're talking to the child. Now, a couple of measures we use that I really like, and I don't think I mentioned to you when we spoke before this interview, but there's Barry Bricklin has some measures, and one of them is called the perception of relationships test. And it's a test you give to the children in the case. And it's like a drawing task. And it's similar to the house tree person. So the house tree person is a personality test, and it's not nearly as good as the MMPI or MCI, but it's interesting. And you have the person draw a house, and you have them draw a tree, and you have them draw a person. And then there are books you can look in and you can interpret. So big eyes would mean you're more paranoid, or different things like that. I evaluated a girl once in California. I was actually working with her. She'd been sexually abused by her brother. And when I asked her to draw a house, she drew two. And there was one house, bigger house, and then there was a little one with dark windows. And when I asked her about it, that was where her brother lived. He was in a adolescent sexual offender place. And she still cared about him and wondered, where's my brother? So that was the house. So the perception of relationships test was developed by Barry Bricklin, and he did some research on it. And it's designed to get at how a child experiences their parent emotionally. And so there are 8 different tasks in this test. And one of them, the very first one, has stick figures. And one is the mom and one is the dad. And you point out as the evaluator. And you say, draw a picture of yourself in this picture. And you're looking to see which parent the child draws themselves closer to. And there are other things like that. One of them is draw a picture of your family. And they'll sometimes ask, well, which family? And I'll say, whoever you think of as your family. and you're getting at, one of the things you're wanting to see is where are they in that picture? And then where are their mom and dad? So whatever the issues are the parents have, a huge part of this is the child, and how are they seeming to be affected? Because, we all have reactions to certain people. I know in my office, we have different kinds of therapists. And there are some that if I were to see, some that I would think, oh, I'd want to see that person, or I'm not sure I'd want to see that, but they're all good therapists, and they're just different styles. And with parenting, you can pull all those different parts together and potentially be a good parent, but we have to parent each child a little differently too. And so I want to be open to that, what does this particular child, or what do these different children need, and how are the parents parenting? And typically you don't want to split up kids in a family, of course, but how are they able to impact them? So big red flags, personality disorders, yes, but substance abuse, physical abuse, potential history of that. And then with these measures, so the perception of relationships test is good. There's another one that Bricklin developed called the Bricklin perceptual scales that I really like. What you do, you have these rectangular cards and you read a question. So how well does your dad do at helping you complete your homework? And you lay it down and you give them a pin, and there's this black line, and they just put it somewhere, anywhere from very well at one end to not so well. And then you flip it over as the evaluator, and they're broken up into little increments, and you get a score from, I think it's 1 to 100. And about 20 questions later, it will say, how well does your mom do at helping you get your homework done? So they're balanced, but they're not consecutive. And you can begin again, to get a sense of which parent's more effective. Now, sometimes though, alienation is involved.
That was going to be my next question, because when we get into alienation, oftentimes there is, first of all, my experience in this arena is typically there is a personality disorder involved in that process.
Yes.
And there is, it gets tricky because they can seem to be incredibly involved and nurturing and all of that with the children, where in fact they are over enmeshed and over controlling of the children in that process. And there is something in their history that comes forward that, you know, the world isn't safe, and that you've got to have your head on a swivel all the time to see where the danger is coming, which is again that next movement toward that generational piece toward borderline stuff. And where that is taking place, the child may actually have this sense that this parent is their protector, and there is a image put out that this other parent is a perpetrator of whatever sorts, and it isn't true.
And I see, I'm sure you've had this experience, I see people in our field doing great harm sometimes in that way. Mm-hmm. I did a parenting time evaluation where there were basic caregiving behaviors, and and when I was in graduate school, I worked for 3 years, 20 hours a week in Long Beach at a place called the Sarah Center. It's called For the Child now, but it was a sexual abuse treatment center. And one of the things that we were taught is we did sexual abuse evaluations. And one of the things we were taught is there are basic caregiving behaviors, and that's not typically considered abuse. So if you're giving a 4-year-old a bath and you touch their penis or their vaginal area, that's not abuse. But I did a case where those were some of the behaviors described, and it was described as abuse. Mm-hmm. And these therapists were so clearly, I read their case notes, and that's another thing I evaluate if people are in therapy. And they were so clearly against one of the parents and stating that things that weren't abusive were abuse.
Right.
And the oldest daughter in this family, there were 3 daughters. The oldest daughter was brought into a family session with the mom and her 2 sisters and the grandmother. And basically a lot of pressure was put on her to say that the dad had sexually abused her. And it was terrible. You know, it was, so we often do a lot of damage in that regard. And I've seen it both ways, you know, where, yes, with the narcissistic and whatever that is, borderline-y or histrionic, but that spectrum of narcissism, where you have to be part of the, almost like an amoeba, right? You've got to be part of the family way and see the other parent this way. And I am your nurturer and protector and your everything. But I've also seen it where parents will say a parent is alienating when they're really self-alienating.
Right. No, that stuff comes up all the time. And the first thing that I'll tell a parent in that process is where weren't you showing up? Because the stuff does not happen in a vacuum.
Yes. But they're wanting to blame the other parent and say the other parent's alienating when it's so clear that they're engaging in alienating behaviors.
Right.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you today, Luke, is this is complicated.
Yes.
This is not something that is black and white in any way, shape, or form. And the job that you guys are given and the translation of the information that you give to judges has got so many different ways for them to interpret through their own lenses.
Yes.
And, you know, I know that as parent evaluators or custody evaluators, you guys are really looking at what is it that we can do here to optimize these children's experience going forward without ripping them away from both parents and creating something that has got the opportunity to grow if both parents are willing to make that happen.
And that's part of what, when I do an evaluation, that I would hope I am really hopeful of this kind of briefer, quicker evaluation process where we can get the data in place.
I want to go into that with you in a minute.
Yeah, and it's really something that's still being developed. So it's like hot off the press, and it wasn't my idea. It was talking to Karen Anderson and Nargis Kokar. It was their idea, and I thought, oh yeah, because I just decided earlier this year, I don't want to do these parenting time evaluations anymore. They're too. It's a lot of work on my part, and I put my heart and soul into it, and it costs the client a lot of money, and then it's coming out in court 18 months later. It's just it doesn't seem like it's worthy.
Right.
And I don't want to do, I'm all for getting paid, but I want to provide value, and I don't feel like it's value. And I'm excited about this other thing. But yes, ideally, you're trying to identify the strengths and weaknesses, and then identify how those can be alleviated. Because I do start with the basic understanding. I accept in Illinois, the default right now is that each parent will get 50% of the time. And I start with that's good for the kids. Each parent provides different things for a kid, whatever those things are, based on who those parents are, and that it's good for them to have a good relationship with both parents. And so I start with that. And then there are things, like personality disorders, substance use, abusive behavior that are going to tip the scales. But it is complicated and it's nuanced. And when I'm seeing people who have issues, but they're really owning up to them. So many people, when they do these, so I mentioned the MMPI and MCMI, everybody thinks they're really smart and that they can fool the test. They do. And I'll tell them before they take the test, I'll say, almost all these tests have validity scales that are going to evaluate how straight you're being with the test. And so a lot of people think they can fool it. And if you do, I'm just going to have to say it's invalid. The validity scales will come back, it won't be valid. But especially in parenting time evaluations, a lot of the measures are not valid. And so I'm left with big gaping holes. But, that in and of itself, of course, says something. Right. What are they hiding and why? And if they're so great, why are they hiding? And so it does make them, as some of my clients would say, us, right?
I did a podcast with a judge a couple of weeks ago, and to your point, when somebody shows up and they're forthcoming with what's going on and what they're working on and how they want to make changes, that is probably one of the biggest indicators that there's not something else going on that is problematic, that we've just got something here to work at and look at. And that's what I try to tell my clients going in, is that let's not try to paint a picture that isn't real. Let's paint a picture of where we are and where we want to go in all of this.
And I mean, I use that all the time in marriage counseling, that, one of the best things you can do is just genuinely say, I'm sorry, right? Because you are going to screw up sometimes. And if you can own up to it, and public figures, if they can genuinely say, I'm sorry, I screwed up, people are forgiving. And it does, it speaks to ego strength in some ways, right? That you're able to be genuine, and it is going to be more convincing, I think, in a court setting. But that's the theatrical part of things. But as far as with your children and being an effective parent, being genuine and owning up with your kids too, and saying sometimes, I'm sorry, yeah, I overreacted, or I screwed up, and I'm not that's going to mean a lot to the kids too. And speaking about personality disorders, again, one of the hallmarks, of course, is that black and white thinking. I'm all good and they are all bad, whoever they are. Often, the other parents are all bad. And when you see that, but unfortunately, so often when there's one personality disorder, there are two, right? Both parents, they married for a reason. And so it is a matter of, sometimes it feels like the lesser of two evils, but that's not always the case. But even if that is the case, those are the kids' parents, and you want them to have the best outcome. And so trying to figure that out and help them. But it's very complicated. And where I see psychologists getting in trouble, and where I see people who aren't trained evaluators getting in trouble is losing their perspective. Where I tell people, I worked with another therapist once who did a lot of damage to a client of mine. And she was court ordered to do family therapy to help reunify this parent and the children. And even they wanted me to sit in on a session with them. And the child was saying that the other parent would spend hours every Saturday putting down the parent who was my client. And I was afraid this therapist she kept asking me about the case, and I kept telling her, you need to be circumspect. You can't lose your perspective. You need to be able to step back and look at it less passionately. And in this case, I emailed her a couple of days later and said, hey, here are the things in that session that I saw and heard, because I was afraid things were being twisted. And they were, to the point where it did a lot of damage to my client. And they lost their perspective. And I think, that's where, if we're going to be helpful in these cases, there are a lot of passions, and we need to be able to step back. And so how do you do that? How do you step back? Because you're dealing with this all the time. I don't know how you do it. I tell Karen Anderson that. I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do this exclusively.
Well, my practice, one, I get a lot of supervision. And I mean that seriously. I get a lot of supervision with this, because I'm always trying to look for where I am losing my perspective, or where I might be losing my perspective, either, aligning with a client, or having my own history come in, or what. So this is something that I am on top of all of the time. I've also got a pretty good self-care process. I try to balance my world a lot, so I, get that downloaded piece. But when I'm working with my clients, I make it a point to challenge their reality, to really have them challenge their own belief systems and how they come to that stuff, and to be looking at their own process, especially when I start to hear the victim stuff come out, and I really kind of pull that back around and make them responsible for their piece. And that helps me.
And that, what you're talking about is the term I use with my clients a lot of times is narrative.
Yep.
Right? What is your narrative about yourself? What is your narrative about your kids? What is your narrative about their parent, their other parent? And yes, if we see ourselves as a victim, or we see ourselves as the great protector, and there are cases, there are some really pathological parents,
for sure.
But yes, helping them to see things differently would be what would be helpful. And that's frustrating though, because I see a lot of times, and when I'm doing the parenting time evaluations, I'm looking at other mental health professionals' work, and I see some really crummy stuff where people are losing perspective, and they don't even talk to the other parent. Right. They haven't talked to the other parent. They're buying a narrative, hook, line, and sinker. And I'm thinking, how naive are you?
and in this arena, to your point, Luke, there are a lot of therapists out there that are doing a lot of damage to the whole process.
Yes.
And for me, I have a small cadre of people that I'll refer to, and past that, I won't give a recommendation. And I'm pretty tight on that. And when something comes up with one of those people that is a little bit off, I'll pick up the phone and I'll call them, and I'll check in to see where they arrived at that. And they may have arrived in a good spot. But
so Brooke, how do you deal with that though? So you're working with a case, and they're seeing a therapist who's off. And I don't go out of my way to try to make enemies, but in this one case where this therapist hurt my client a lot, on a Sunday afternoon, she emailed me, or she said she had sent like 50 emails to different parties and made a bunch of phone calls on a Sunday afternoon. And at the end of it all, she emailed me and said, it's all my fault. And I didn't respond to any of it because it was crazy.
Right.
But when you have a therapist like that, and they're a party that you're working with is also involved with them somehow, what do you do with that? because I feel really angry, but it doesn't help my client to blast them. It would feel good.
And kind of like you, I don't depend on referrals from therapists. And if I piss them off, I don't really mind if I piss them off a little bit. I don't make a habit out of it, but I'll have my clients challenge themselves with the perspectives and to see where it is in an alignment and what is working and what is not. And if it's not, I may give them another referral. And I may say, you may want to try this just because you might want to try this without getting too deep into the woods. And there's enough implicit in that, you know, oftentimes they'll go, yeah, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I want to spend the last piece of our time together here, Luke, talking about this new model that you're putting together with these
Sure.
two other people. And I want to preface it because I know Karen.
Yes.
And I know who she is and how she works and the strengths that she's got. She's a rock star.
Yes.
And from all accounts, she feels the same way about you. And the other person was
Nargis Kokar.
Nargis.
Yes.
And again, so here are three areas that I think are convergent and are volatile, dangerous, and can be incredibly effective.
Yes.
And again, it's all dependent on the practitioners that are involved in it. And one of the places that I struggle, which is what we were just talking about, is therapists that are not thorough, GALs that don't understand the therapeutic end of it.
And don't give the time to the case.
And parenting coordinators that are not skilled, that aren't good with holding boundaries, that don't call balls and strikes and get outside of their purview. So what you guys are doing is bringing these three pieces together to help the judge see from all of these perspectives what's happening in this family system. I love it because most times these are three people that aren't having these conversations, and it ends up with the GAL who has privilege to deliver all of this.
Yes. Yes.
So tell me some more.
Well, it's just in its infancy, at least my involvement. So I had been contacted by Karen a couple of months ago, maybe. And because of COVID, I haven't seen her in a while. We used to have lunch periodically. But she was telling me about Nargis Kokar and just raving about her as a GAL and how she wants this faster process where before things are hardened between parents and kids in a negative way, they can be addressed. And which is perfect because at the same time I was coming to it feeling like, holy cow, I do this huge evaluation. 18 months later, when I've forgotten what I said, I'm asked to come into court and give, and do depositions and then do testimony. And it just doesn't feel helpful. And I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do the therapy part. And so, after talking with the two of them, I'm coming in now and I'm doing short evaluative pieces. So I just am evaluating a teenage girl, for example, whose parents are divorcing and there's a lot of difficulty. And the court had asked that she be evaluated and had also asked that one of the parents be evaluated. Now the parent's not on my schedule and they're going to have to account for that, I guess, when they go to court. But I'm evaluating this teenager and I'm going to be able to give the court some data right away about what's going on with her, because there have been some seemingly wild things happening. And you're wondering, when I first heard the behaviors, I'm wondering what's going on with this person. And so that's where I collect my objective data through the tests. I talk to them, and then I'm going to give them feedback about the data. And that's part of the evaluation process too. It's not just me talking at them, but I'm going to say the results suggest this. And this isn't something you talked about before. Tell me more. And we're the final version, and I always call it a rough draft when I go over an evaluation, even a custody or parenting time evaluation with somebody, it's a rough draft. And if there's more, I'll add it into the report. So it's going to be a faster process. And Nargis Kokar's idea is she'll talk with the attorneys, and hopefully they can exert their influence with their clients, and we can get things going in a more positive direction with the parents and their kids. And the focus is on, rather than battle, the focus is on positive engagement. And so going through this, and I think a lot of parents would say, I want to have a good relationship. And a lot of parents would say, I want my spouse to have my former, estranged spouse to have one too. But even if they don't, of course, it is best. And so Karen is exerting her influence, and Nargis is exerting her influence to get them to come in. And so I'll gather some data. I'll make some recommendations. I may do therapy. Often they have their own therapist already, and they may do it, but they can now be informed about, what's going on. And the purpose is to try to strengthen the relationship between the child and both parents. And so what are the issues in a more live way? So we're not coming in 18 months later after the child is completely damaged, and the kids sometimes don't want to have anything to do with either parent, right?
So you guys are in a relatively small system. You don't have a lot of judges in your jurisdiction. You don't have a big cell to this.
It's very small. It's probably, I don't know what Bloomington the population is, but it might be a catchment area of maybe 80,000 people within its mile radius. So
you've got one or two family law judges, and this is something that I think, especially knowing this team, at least what I'm starting to learn about this team, is this is going to be somewhat that's an easy sell to the bench.
And it's an easy sell to the bench because nothing to do with me. It's an easy sell because of Karen's relationships, her long-standing relationships, and the respect she has. And then Nargis Kokar too is coming in, and I appreciate it. So many family law involved attorneys, it's about winning and losing, and it's battle. And I spoke with a criminal defense attorney once as a client who was getting a divorce, and he said he got the fastest divorce in history, even though he had 2 children, because his soon-to-be ex-wife had hired an attorney who was known to bring in 2 attorneys to court and bill double and is unscrupulous. And he didn't want to do that. And, and so Nargis Kokar is not that kind of attorney. She really, it's not all about battle. It's about reconciliation and trying to find out what is going on. And that's where I come in. I'm the investigator, sort of. I feel like a psychological detective. And so I figured out what's going on, and then I can make recommendations about what needs to be done. And that's my expertise.
Are you guys going to develop this model in a way where you do trainings or teach this outside to other groups of people?
That would be really fun.
I think it would be a great idea. And I would love to put people together to have you guys do this, because again, I think the model that you're talking about, because this stuff does get spread out there so much, if there is a good cadre of respectable people in these fields, and they exist in every one of these jurisdictions, can put these pieces together and have something like this rapid fire into get the information to the bench. So at the very least, we've got early intervention. Mm-hmm. Even if this does trail out longer, that we can start to put the pieces together. Because again, I'm working with clients right now that are working with GALs that frankly shouldn't be doing what they're doing. And I've got clients that are working with evaluators that have gone numb, that are burned out, that are not engaged in this because of exactly what you're talking about, this long drawn out piece and having to come back and go to court and look at it. And I'm not saying that they are bad at what they do, but they're just not there anymore in the place.
And it's so much data for the judge too, because you're doing this dump, so I wouldn't ever do a 13-page evaluation because that's not enough, but 150-page, that's why I do a summary at the end, but even the summary might be 20 pages long or 30 pages long. And that's a dump, and the judge is supposed to, among all the other things going on in this case, is supposed to read it and have it be of value. Yes. I'm excited. I hadn't thought about potentially doing trainings, but I've known Karen for a number of years, and I really respect her, and she does phenomenal work. And I wish every place had parent coordinators. We don't, to my knowledge, have them in Peoria. We do in Bloomington have her. And that I recommend that to people all the time.
They're becoming more and more, but again, it's we're throwing another professional in there, and if they're not up to speed with what they're doing, it could be problematic. So,
but you're right. I think though, most people at some point want to do good, right, in their field.
Yep.
In mental health, we want to, and I think most attorneys, when they start, probably want to, and and parent coordinators do too. And so I think just being able to identify those people, and then if we can give a clearer path, and I think that's what you've tried to do with your work, right, is provide that clear path. These are some effective ways of dealing with these kinds of cases. And I think, that's exciting. And one of the things I'm thinking as we're talking about this today, that I think probably Karen and Nargis and I need to do maybe monthly, is have a meeting where we talk about some of these different cases, and we talk about our ideas too, because it is kind of forming right now. And I've met with Karen or talked with Karen, and I met with Nargis. We had some, I'm sure you're not familiar with this, but we had some bad weather recently and had some cancellations. And so I walked over to her office in some bad weather, and we spent a couple of hours talking about these things. But it would be good to do that on a regular basis. And I think because it's so new, it'd be almost like the Inklings, C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. They used to get together in a pub and banter around ideas.
So keep me informed and let me know how this comes together, Luke. And let's take this time to kind of wind this down.
Yes.
I want to really thank you again for taking the time to do this podcast with me. I think it's important stuff to get out there, and
the opportunity
to talking with you again. If anybody wants to reach out, Luke, can you give them your contact information?
Sure. So I work at a practice called Christian Psychological Associates, and I can be reached at home@christianpsychological.org is the practice email address. And we have a web page and a Facebook page.
Sweet.
I would be happy to communicate more with anybody who would want to.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
This has been an evaluator's perspective, and everybody come back. We'll have another episode for you next week. Thanks for coming and enjoying this chat with Luke with me.
Brook, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or recorded anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. They go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and
pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brook has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely, I do. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brook@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brook.